chap.
So that's a good thing, you know.
That's something that should be done on a regular basis in all of the nursing homes.
But this fire prevention idea, the Fire Prevention Week.
Yeah, when did it start?
It originated after the great Chicago fire of 1871.
The big Chicago fire of 1871.
Right,
that we've seen movies about that.
Oh, yeah.
How did it start?
Well, you've heard, you know.
Yeah, I've heard, but tell some of our younger
viewers.
Well,
Mrs. O'Leary was in the barn and looking after her cattle, and one of them was ailing, and so she left the barn, she left the lamp there, and she left the barn to go in the kitchen and get some salt for it, and while she was in there, the animal kicked over the lamp into a stack of dry hay, and away she went.
But that was 1871.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, when was the Great St. John fire?
6 years later.
1877.
Yeah.
So, but it was a dry season in both cases, was it?
Yeah, there was some rather striking similarities. There was, in both instances, the fire broke out at the end of the driest season in the city's history. And there was a high wind blowing, too, at the time. And they, aside from that gale carrying the embers, there's also thousands of fences and sheds and dry sheds and outhouses acting just like fuses to carry the fire from one house to another.
Sure.
So
were the houses in Chicago at that time built as closely together as, say, ours were?
In the odd instance, there would be quite no, they're mostly close together like ours.
Yeah.
But in the odd instance, I'd say there'd be, yards, big yards or something like that. But there were also contrasts, too. Like, of course, we lost, something in the order of, say, 1,700 houses.
Well, that's a lot for here, for this city.
It was. Comparatively, maybe it's somewhat the same, but they lost 17,000.
You know what the population of St. John was?
Around, in 77, around 40,000. Theirs had run around 300,000.
In 71. Sure. Oh, yeah. Sure.
But there's other contrast, too. Whereas our firemen, the horses were able to gallop down from Union Street to York Point in just 2 minutes, in our case.
Yeah. Now, York Point was where?
Right down there by the...
Market Square?
No, down by the foot of Union Street, almost by the old power plant.
Yeah,
there.
well, that's Market Square area.
Yeah, that area. Yeah. But in the case of Chicago, the fire was going full tilt by the time the firemen got there. You see, there was really a comedy of errors almost. Not comedy, I suppose, but the fellow who was the watchman at the the watchtower in the courthouse. His job was to scan the city for fires, and he misjudged the location of Mrs. O'Leary's barn by a full mile.
Oh, yeah, so they got on the wrong streets.
Oh, well, not only that, but then another thing, the first alarm that was turned in came from a faulty box and never reached the station. And the first fire engine that got to the fire promptly broke down. So the fire had a really good head start.
So a fire in those days, it's bad enough today, but it was much more scary in those days, Frank, than today.
They were taken...
But we're fortunate. We have a very, without a doubt, a very efficient fire department here.
Oh, yeah, no question
about that. And they're there and they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But back in those days, go ahead, excuse me, I interrupt you.
But there were some, of course, the scenes were spectacular, and in one case I thought it was kind of burlesque. When that big body house on State Street caught fire, and the girls, fresh from their beds, burst out into the open street with nothing on, wearing nothing more than the profession demanded.
Yeah. Were you there to see that?
No, I was just...
a few years too early.
I missed that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You must have been peeved about that ever since, I suppose.
Oh, I
That's a
thought, I
mess.
said, what a wonderful thing to have a you know, a tape
Yeah.
of that. you know.
Yes. Well, they didn't have videotapes in those days.
No.
All they have now, well, they have some pathetic pictures of that
Oh,
Chicago
yeah.
fire, though.
Yeah.
Really,
Oh, yeah.
of the people.
Well,
And
well,
that, all right. So when that happened, that was 6 years after the St. John fire.
you see, St. John had sent them $10,000, which I would give that as today's money at probably at least 200,000.
Oh yeah, it's amazing that St. John was able to do that just
No,
6
well,
years
you see,
after their big fire.
As I said before, they had just come through the most prosperous quarter century in our history.
But even following that fire,
Yeah.
you know, there must have been a lot of people who did not have insurance on their buildings back in those days, who
No.
lost everything.
But Chicago, Chicago didn't forget. The mayor of Chicago wired them and said, "Don't think we will ever forget what you did for us."
Mm-hmm.
And they doubled the amount that we had sent them, and they sent a professional organizer to see that the help, the goods and money that was brought in was properly, you know, because there'd be quite a lot of confusion.
Oh, sure.
And he had the experience of their fire.
Right. So he administered it.
Oh, yeah.
See that the people who
Oh,
should get it should.
They were
get it.
very grateful.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's the same as with all the people in the third world now who need help. It has to be administered properly.
Oh, yeah.
It does.
Oh, yeah. There
Otherwise,
can be a lot of...
a lost cause. So let's you know what I was pleased to see a few years ago, Frank, was when they located that bell, the big fire bell, and I don't know the history of that, up at King Square I think it's also as a memorial to firemen who
That's
lost
right,
their
it,
lives in the line of duty.
That's right. It was...
But it made a beautiful memorial to them.
Well, I think I'm correct about it, where that bell came from. I know it was it was cast in Troy, New York, for Maccavities in 1852, and it was, I think it rang its last alarm. It was used, I think, as our main fire bell in the old wooden bell tower at the head of King Street.
We've both seen photos of that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think it rang its last alarm for the Great Fire. I think.
Yeah.
But there are 8 names. See the names on that. The men that have given their lives in the tour of duty. There's 8 names there, dating from 1874 until when the memorial was put up a few years ago. But any of the older firemen can tell you that for every one of those names, he can cite 100 instances of very close calls.
Oh, undoubtedly.
Sure. That every
Yeah.
time they go out, they potentially dangerous.
Well, look how fortunate we were when that explosion happened a few years ago.
Oh,
the
that-
gas main. How
There we
there
were
was
just
no loss of life at all.
we were just lucky there.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
all.
All right, now we agree, I think, without a doubt, Frank, that the firemen are well trained, and you know the latest methods, and they keep up to date,
Oh, yeah.
and they've got a whole training area out there in Millersville.
Yeah.
But I often wondered, how do they pass their time in the firehouse itself? Because there's a lot of days there's nothing going on. What do they do? They must have a regular list of duties.
Oh, they have plenty of chores to do. They have regular, they have, say, a window day. That means every window say, up in headquarters and camaraderie, every window has to be cleaned inside and out. That's 200 surfaces.
Hmm.
Then they have a hose day, and that hose has to be handled 6,000 feet of it.
What do you mean handled?
Well, I guess hose will kink, and it will also mold and like that, and it has to be...
roll it out?
Yeah, 6,000 feet of it. Well, then they have a brass day, and they have regular training days that they do training. And
how long is your shift? Do you know?
I don't know what the shifts are, but once a year, every wall in that building has to be washed down.
Mm-hmm.
So
they really look after their own place.
You wonder whether they have time for fire.
I often see the equipment outdoors on a nice day, and they're cleaning that all down and polishing it up. So,
do you remember the old steamer, the brass steamer that you could almost use as a mirror to comb your hair?
Frank, I'm not as old as you are.
Oh,
I'm getting there, but I'm not as old. No, I don't.
Well, they had the brass
steamer. Is that how you combed your hair?
Oh, yeah.
You could look at it. It was polished so beautifully.
Well, they had the big brass steamer, and it was always shining.
Yeah, we've always had good equipment here in St. John.
Oh, yeah.
We should take a short break now, Frank, and we'll come back, and I'd like to see what you can tell us about the Salvage Corps, a very important part of the fire department.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Memory Lane. I'm Reg Wannamaker, and Frank O'Brien is just getting into the meat of this subject today, which is fire prevention, and we're talking about the fire department. And now I'd like to find out what Frank knows, and he knows a lot about everything. Well, you do know a lot about everything, I have to admit that.
Especially about body health.
You'd like to know more, but at your age, you'd better stay clear. I'd like to see, I'm interested in fire in the Salvage Corps because I can remember my grandfather, who was a Salvage Corps volunteer when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
He had the big bell in his house, in his bedroom.
Oh.
And whenever there was a fire, that bell rang in his house. So when did that start?
Well,
when did the Salvage Corps start?
That corps was organized in 1882, and it's the oldest in Canada. The oldest organization of its kind in Canada. And they also act as fire police, and you can imagine there's a lot of need for that.
Yeah. But what are they supposed to do? What exactly do? They rush into the house. They don't carry the hose or anything.
No,
they're after.
They probably, I presume that they get whatever goods or merchandise or household effects that, have to be saved, that they can save. I think they when they get them out, they cover them over and protect them. But they act, too, as a fire police. And I'll just tell you, and this is how much that is needed. In the Great Fire of Chicago, the firemen repeatedly turned their hoses on mobs of looters.
Oh, I suppose, sure.
And the Pinkerton Agency was hired after the fire to protect the material. They had orders to shoot on sight. And now here in St. John, you have an instance. It was years ago that Ham Brothers had a bakery on Main Street. I think it's at the location where the liquor store is now. They had a small fire, and Mr. Ham found that they had lost, by fire destruction, $20 worth of merchandise.
Sure.
But when he tallied things up, there was $400 worth of goods and equipment missing.
Go ahead.
So there you go, the need for police.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize that the police part of that.
Oh, yeah, that's part of the, if they weren't around,
So how do they gather them all together now? They're volunteers. Am I correct there? They're still volunteers?
Yes, I don't know.
Do they still have a bell in their house, I wonder?
I presume that I haven't gone into that part of it.
Be interesting to know.
Yeah.
Because I know they're very active. I know a fellow lives down my way, Norm Wasson, who's been involved with Salvage Corps for a number of years. Do you know Norm at all?
No, years ago, I think it was Fred Brown used to come to DeVal's where he was with, I think, Emery Brothers it was. And Fred is one of probably the senior Salvage Corps men. He's probably retired from it now.
Yeah, well, the Salvage Corps wouldn't have to go to every fire anyway, would they?
Oh, I don't
do they attend
suppose
every
that.
fire?
No, I suppose it wouldn't be.
I don't think they
necessary.
would. All right.
Then there was, pardon me, Reg, there was the rescue squad too. They have working out of that.
That's what I was going to mention now. That the rescue squad isn't as old as the Salvage Corps.
No, I don't know.
In recent years.
I don't know when they, that was organized.
Well, we've all seen their equipment rushing, any time of the day or night.
Oh, heart attacks and what you could imagine mostly. But then they had some rather bizarre cases that you call. You never know what they're going to find. one time there was a woman wedged between the toilet bowl and the tub, and they had to get her out of
Between
that.
the toilet bowl and the tub.
Yeah, there must have been enough
She
space.
fell
there.
off one or the other.
Yeah, and get in there.
Yeah.
Another time, I think it was 2 o'clock.
That'd be kind of embarrassing, wouldn't it?
Oh, God.
Huh?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it was 2 o'clock in the morning that the guy appears at the door of the headquarters. Here
You're talking about King Street East?
Yeah.
There now? Yeah.
he's carrying a big iron ball
Yeah.
with a chain attached to a steel collar around his neck. He had been the honored guest at a stag party, preparing him for the wedding,
Oh, yeah.
for his ball and chain.
Yeah, very good. Very,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
I guess they had that.
So he had
boy.
to go to get it cut off.
And I think he probably was half cut anyway.
Oh yeah, sure, sure. Well, but that's somebody gave a lot of thought to that.
Oh, yeah.
So he's probably happily married now.
Yeah.
But he had to lug this up, carry the ball, and go to
Yeah.
the fire department and get somebody to cut it off.
And now he's welded for life.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. You got a real ball and chain
Yeah.
now.
God, yeah.
Now, the rescue squad, we know, is very active, and there must be a special section of the fire department just for that purpose. Do you think, or is that any of the boys there? But
No,
they
I
have to
think
be
it's-
special training for that.
I don't know what the system is up there on that.
No. Well,
But,
I think they'd have to have the first aid and
Yeah.
all kinds of.
Oh, I
training.
understand they have yet to deliver a baby,
Oh, is that
but
right?
they've come very, very close.
Well,
they-
go ahead.
Yeah, they phone ahead to the emergency department in the hospital, and things are usually right ready for them when they get there.
But sooner or later they'll.
They're
they'll be
going. They're
midwives.
going to get. They're
Yeah.
going to
Sure.
deliver twins.
That's right. Sure.
Yeah.
Now, high rises. We haven't a whole lot of high rises, but we have a fair number of high rises.
Well, you have the telephone is 19 stories, and the city hall is 16. I would say the first one of its kind would be the sugar refinery, 12 stories. But they have an very, very...
The sugar refinery, that's an older building. You're
1914.
Yeah.
They probably were the first of those storied buildings, except the elevators.
Sure.
It was the first one of the high-rise type. They have an really... they have a system of boxes, just
all throughout the plant.
all through the plant.
Oh,
you
sure,
know,
they'd have
and,
to.
You see, refined sugar dust is every bit as dangerous from an explosive angle as grain dust, and so they're really right on top of any fire that any
Have they
happens.
ever had any bad fires down there?
I think they've had quite a few smaller fires, but I don't think any major one. They have a fire chief and everything.
But there is an extreme fire hazard.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So they have to be commended then, the sugar refinery.
Oh, yeah.
How many boxes are that? What's that? The list of their boxes?
I
that
do, yeah.
Each employee gets.
There's
or
one
something?
about every floor and in every shed,
Yeah.
and with the hose connections and everything.
Sure,
too.
sure.
But the
Well, how about the other? See, the old days that you're familiar with because you lived in that era.
yeah.
The old days, there weren't any buildings higher than 5 or 6 stories.
No, for the simple reason is that house brick and mortar will not stand the weight.
Sure.
I mean, they could stand the weight if they went higher, though. The base walls have to become prohibitively thick and impractical.
Say that again. Prohibitively thick.
Well, I
That's
mean, they
good.
get thicker and thicker as the higher they go, the
Sure.
building goes to support the weight.
Yeah.
But there was the coming of steel at the end of
Changed everything.
at the last century that made skyscrapers a reality.
Mhm.
It wasn't for the steel.
So all right then. How high does our ladders reach? How many
At
stories?
10 stories.
10 stories.
But by the time usually the
So
firemen
what if
get-
you're on the 15th story?
But they have such a thorough, in these the telephone place, they have a thorough sprinkler system and standpipe system that by the time the firemen get there, usually those fires would be almost definitely under control, And they likewise have regular fire, and must have
Yeah.
regular fire drills. They have to have.
Sure. Well, I think also the fire department, the fire department inspectors would really check up on these high
They
rises.
check
the
to be
apartment
sure that
buildings
the
and
drills have been held.
Yeah, and plus everything is in working order.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
What about now? Anything else you want to say on the our big fire that we still hear so much about was in 1877,
77.
and the Chicago fire is 1871.
Yeah.
Now, the city rebuilt very quickly.
Yeah.
You know, what date was that in 1877?
June the 20th.
June the 20th.
But you see, a similar thing happened with the St. John fire, as say with the Chicago fire in this instance too. The night the Chicago fire happened, a forest fire took place in, I think, in Wisconsin.
The forest fire.
And it was the greatest loss of life, I think, in a fire up to that time. Over 1,500 people in all the villages went up. But the telegraph wires were burned, and the outside world didn't hear about it for several days after. So it was it was lost to histories because of the
Sure.
the Chicago fire.
yeah.
So the same happened here.
Yeah. Was there any loss of life here at our great fire?
Well, 18 here, but in
Were there 18?
Chicago about 300.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, you rarely hear about, say, the North End, our North End, because of the Great Fire.
Sure, but there have been some bad fires in North End.
Well, you start in 1841, they lost how many? They lost 60 houses. You go to 1877, no, let's say 1841. Then 1864, they lost I think they lost 100 houses. And that one in 64,
Well, that's serious enough.
and I think, well, that one,
in those days.
the bad feature of that was, I think that was the one that started down at the riverfront, and it started at 1 o'clock in the morning on December the 10th.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine the dead of winter being put out in
Right down Indian Town, you're talking
yeah,
about?
right down to right on the waterfront.
Oh, sure.
Well, then, right to the day, October the 20th, right to the day 4 months after our Great Fire in 1877, Indian Town had another one, took 25 houses. But the really big one happened in 1899. And that one...
You're still talking North End.
yeah, it was Indian Town, too. You see, that one in 1899, it broke out down in Bridge Street near NASA's warehouse. And there was a wind behind that. The wind behind it. The fire rushed up Indian Town Hill, driving the firemen back block by block until it raged for about, I think, about 8 or 9 hours. And by the time it was finished, well, they said that in the glare of that fire, you could read fine print over in Carlton.
Mm-hmm.
And but when that fire was over, 15 blocks, all of Indian Town had practically gone.
Well, the thing is, any outbreak of a fire, if there's a wind, that's when it's can
And
go
it
to
helps
control.
to make its own wind.
Yes, right.
too.
Yes, yeah, sure.
But imagine, the whole of Indian Town went on that fire.
Sure.
200, how many? 200 houses.
Yeah. Any loss of life at that time?
Only one, I think. Only
So
one.
we've been fortunate, really, over the years, Frank,
Oh,
since
yeah.
those bad fires.
Well, that was the last, Fred, that was the last multiple house fire,
Yeah.
really. There's none in
Sure.
this century except, say, Westfield, where 100 buildings went down, but that's not in the city.
No.
But other than that one in Indian Town, that was the last of the
Yeah.
houses, like you get over 10 houses.
Now, we just have a few moments left, Frank, but you mentioned at the beginning of the program the wood stoves. You know, all of the new wood-burning stoves
Yeah.
that people are purchasing and setting up. They have to be very careful of how they set those up and whether they have enough draft, if the creosote is the chimney's cleaned up or whatever, don't they?
Well, what they...
You know, it's terrible.
What those fire inspectors find when they go around today, even today, it really terrifying.
I know it does.
the conditions they see.
Oh, I was up to an old home in Grand Lake, And the people there have their stovepipe going right through the house like they did in the old days.
Yeah,
But they've never had a fire, and they have everything the way it should be, and it goes right through their bedroom, all through the house.
So
that's their source of heat.
So the pipe is acting as a fuse.
That's true. That's true. Sure.
No.
But just to go back again to the beginning of the program, when you mentioned smoking, seriously though, is still a great cause of many fires. You see it all the time.
It will be reduced to the extent that smoking itself, goes out of style.
Sure.
And so.
Well, you'll never go to style.
Yeah, but I wouldn't last that long. I haven't got much time left.
You don't know how much time you have left.
I'm
You've
facing
lasted this long.
Reg, I'm facing another fire.
Well, yes, that's right. You see that joke? The fellow went to hell. Did you hear that joke? The fellow went to hell.
No.
And he met the devil down there. And the devil says to him, "Smoking or non-smoking?" Yeah.
Oh.
So you'll be in the smoking section down there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how about saying so long to all of our friends?
Bye.